Welcome back to Ready for Merge, the show about what code changes are ready for merge in Bitcoin and Ethereum. For today's show, I have an interview with Preston Van Loon, a full-time Ethereum core developer who builds and maintains the Ethereum consensus layer client Prysm. We talk about his journey into Ethereum, how he became a full-time developer. And one of the things I really appreciate about this interview is that Preston is very honest about his highs and lows, struggles so far in working on Ethereum full-time. And his is a very unique journey because um, not only does he work on Ethereum, the code base, he founded a development team called Prysmatic Labs to build the Prysm client. So he was one of the original members that helped to even make Prysm a reality. It was one of the first consensus layer clients for Ethereum. And for a while in the early years, after the Beacon Chain launch, it was by far the most popular consensus layer client implementation. Preston also has a very unique journey in the sense that he's not just the founder, but he's also walked through an entire acquisition. So Prysmatic Labs, after a couple of years of operation, was acquired by Offchain Labs, the team that builds the Arbitrum layer 2 on top of Ethereum. So in this interview, he really goes through his entire journey of being a developer, a founder, a businessman. And there's just a lot of learnings in this interview about what it's like working as an Ethereum developer, but also so much more. Um, this is an interview that I originally recorded last September for a mini series that I did for the ACD Toolkit. The ACD Toolkit was one of the first premium offerings that I made for my Substack. And as you can probably tell from this interview, especially if you're going to watch it on video, I look different. I mean, I sound different too, I guess, because I was just starting off in dipping my toes in the water, getting ready for what would become Ready for Merge in this entire podcast series. But this is just another one of those interviews that I'm slowly bringing back from the series that I did for the ACD toolkit. And now I've really expanded the Meet the Dev series to include new interviews that I've done for Ready for Merge. But this is one of those interviews that is from the Substack vault, or so I say. And as a heads up, next week's show, which I'll talk a little bit more on the back end of this interview, next week's show will also be another Meet the Devs interview from the Substack vault, but a bit more on that later. Without further ado, here is the interview with Preston.
I'm Preston Van Loon, Ethereum core developer. I work on the Prysm consensus client.
What would you say has been your biggest contribution to Ethereum so far in your career?
I'd say my biggest contribution is I was one of the founding people on the Prysm team. Started it in 2018, like kind of before any of that existed. We kind of just started writing code and trying to do things, and since then, the collective effort. I'm one of many people working on the same ideas, but we shipped major milestones like launching proof of stake and the merge and a bunch of other things. So I'd say like starting that project, I feel like uh, my voice, my work, my actions were kind of like one of the catalysts to like, let's start going. Cause when we started like announcing we are going to build Prysm, start working on this, there's nobody was really working on it, but then very quickly it seemed like momentum started building. So I like to imagine that I was a big catalyst to getting things going. Although they were already pre-planned, I feel like I had a major part in making things happen and getting things done. Especially on the Prysm client, I'm a major contributor of that as a core developer.
And Prism, for the first, I would say, like several years after Ethereum launched, the Beacon chain was the primary consensus layer implementation that most node operators were using and relying on. It still is one of the two most popular implementations on Ethereum. I'm so excited to get your story about how that happened. Can you start from how you even found out about Ethereum? What were you doing at the time? You mentioned that in 2018 you started, that was when like the Prism client was something that you guys started working on, but what were you doing before you even found out about Ethereum?
Yeah, so I'll start where I've heard about crypto. So I'd heard about Bitcoin, right? Like usually most people hear about Bitcoin. I heard about it in 2013. I think what got my attention to it was someone was telling me that it hit $1,000 for the first time. And so I started like, figuring out why are people buying this? What does it do? What's the purpose? And after I'd say a brief review of this, it's not hard to understand. I found that it was not fulfilling its mission pretty well. I thought the point of
Hmm.
Bitcoin was just to be P2P money, peer-to-peer money. But I found like, seeing my friend tell me, oh, I went to $1,000 and then like 3 days later it was $300. I was like, that doesn't sound like very good P2P money. And like block times are 10 minutes and like just, it didn't really seem like the way, like the white paper and the design of it was going to be fulfill that mission. I think since then it's pivoted to more of like a store of value, which is pretty debatable with the volatility, but like it's trending upwards. So like if you want to store value that increases in value, that's nice. So I dismissed it as like not a good idea, right? I thought it's not a good idea. And then a couple of years later, I think it was sometime maybe the middle of 2017. It's probably the summer. My a different friend told me, he said we were like at some like, I don't know, we were at some like metal bar and there was such like satanic stuff on the wall, and he's like, dude, you gotta like you gotta look at this thing called Ethereum. Like I'm hearing some really smart people talking about it and it seems really interesting. And he said, you would really like it. This is my friend James. He said, you would probably really like this. I said, okay, I don't know. Like I already looked at something like this a couple years ago. I'll look at it. But this was different. Ethereum was different because it could be peer-to-peer money. That wasn't really the objective, but it could be. It's similar properties to Bitcoin. But the exciting thing was it was a general purpose application. Like you can do anything. You can make money. You can make games. You could um, create tokens. You could do whatever you want. And at the time, that's what people were doing. They were doing a lot of activity. They were launching tokens through ICOs or initial coin offering, and people were going crazy over that. And then there were like NFTs, like crypto kitties. And there's a lot of these like really kind of exciting, but small scale, relatively small scale activity. That activity was already pushing the chain to its limits. And this time, instead of dismissing it as like, oh, well, this like thing can barely handle a handful of cats on CryptoKitties. Like, what good is that? Instead of seeing it like that, I thought of it as an opportunity. I saw that there was this really cool open source community where like a lot of people are building and talking about it. And and I thought, well, like I want to do something like that. I want to like fix it. I like the thing, but it's not working very well. So why don't I just fix it? Like all the code is there. Uh, it's a big difference from, but earlier when I looked at Bitcoin, I was like not very strong at programming skills then, I'd say. Like, so I never thought I could just do things. But when I found Ethereum, I was working at Google. And so I kind of, by getting there as a software engineer, I kind of proven to myself, like, oh, I can do things. I can do like whatever I want. And what I wanted to do was to have an impact and to help make this really cool technology I thought was really cool and make it less of like a novelty and more of a real world commodity that everyone can use, because that was the vision, was like to be this global computer, and the narrative changes a lot, but I still think back to, you have this like one platform that's like, um, it's always online. Like you can't kill it. It's just doing its thing. And that being a general purpose computing platform is really exciting. So, okay. So I saw Ethereum. I thought it was a cool idea. And I found there's like existential problem of like, how are we going to fix this? Well, Vitalik had, I think, just like one blog post about sharding. And I was like, cool, there's a problem no one's working on right now, and I want to do it. So I was like, I just started going on the chat rooms, which like before Discord, the Go Ethereum team is using a tool called Gitter, and it was like a Git based, like based on GitHub repositories. It's like a chat room. So I just go in there. I'm like, hey, like, who wants to just add sharding to Geth? Like a kind of like very naive question. Um, because I just like really did not understand like how complicated Geth is. But I just wanted to like go in there and say, oh, I'll just add sharding. Like I'll read the Vitalik's paper and we'll just do it. And a couple weeks of that, asking the question and not really getting any activity. Then my now friend Raul Jordan comes in and he's like asking exactly the same question. I was like, oh shit, like somebody else wants to do, another like real person wants to do this thing. Like I started messaging him and I'm like, hey, I'm in New York. And he's like, cool, I'm like going to New York next week. Like, let's meet up. So we met up in person. And I was really impressed by Raul. I know you've met him before, and he's just like this really humble dude who's like really, really smart. And he really was just like in it for the same reasons. And we just wanted to make it like a nice thing. Like there was there's no really incentive for us to do it except that we wanted to make it nice. Like there was no way to make money. It was open source code. Um, but we met up in person and we kind of went over like some ideas and said like, okay, cool. Like you're a real person. I'm a real person. Like let's make a team. I think he walked back to his hotel and he thought of the name Prysmatic or Prysmatic Labs, something to do with a prism where like light shines through it and then, it fans out into like a rainbow. That's kind of what we're doing with sharding is you take the one shard and split it up. It's like,
Hmm.
that's a badass name. Like, let's go with that. So we had a name, which is like the hardest part of forming a team. And then we needed some more people. So we kind of just like, then echoed this message of like, oh, we're putting a team like just for fun, like a moonlighting team. We're just doing this for fun. And we got Terrence, Nishant, and a couple other people, on the team, but we like the four of us made this like really good founding, team that like were just really smart, dedicated people. We started, like shortly after that, this was still the beginning of 2018. Shortly after that, the Ethereum Foundation said, we're announcing our grants program. So they, for the first time, had their grants program. And we thought, oh, wow, like people wanted to give us money for something we were going to do anyway. We should definitely do that. So we applied and, and we got in. We got into the first round and we got a grant to do that. I think we flew to Taiwan to meet with all the researchers, much smaller group of core devs back then. We all fit in one room. So that was kind of cool, like to like just like be thrown into the whole thing. Like I hadn't done anything at all in crypto, and here I am, like sitting at the table with the people who are like, how are we going to make this work? How are we going to make this even better? So I found that it was like super, it's kind of like the whole year, that whole first year was really kind of really crazy in my life because I was getting married and I was working at Google and I was working on Ethereum. Like I would wake up early to work on it and then I would stay up late to work on it. I couldn't work on it at work, which was probably like the hardest thing. I was like, oh man, it's like all I could fucking think about. But I couldn't like write any code at work because I mean, ethically, it's not a nice thing to do. But like, it's Google, like they're gonna know. So I just would do as much as I could, and like things started to just get bigger and bigger, where like there were more grants that were coming on, and at some point, people in the community were asking like, "What's taking so long? Like, why can't we do the thing that we're trying to build, which was sharding?" And I replied on Twitter, I said, well, I still have this, really inconvenient job I have to go to uh, all day long, So, and then like out of nowhere, Vitalik replies to this with just like YOLO and ETH transaction, and he sent our team. We had a team like multi-sig. He sent our team 1,000 ETH, and it was like, I mean, Ethereum was $100 at the time. This is $100,000, but um, that was really like a really really big moment for us because what it signaled was, we had like, grants from the foundation. We had grants from like a couple other entities, like people donating, and then one of the founders, the founder of Ethereum, saying like, "Here's money to make this happen." So I knew that, like at that point, we could quit our jobs and like work on this full time because like although we had like just enough runway to make it either like a year or maybe a little bit longer. I knew that with these kind of signals we were getting so far, that the community and everybody wasn't going to, let this project fail for monetary reasons. So we all kind of took the leap of faith at the end of the year. I think it was probably in January. In my case, I wanted to wait for my year-end bonus, the holiday bonus, or like stock vesting or something like that. So I was like, I gotta wait till January for the year end. But I was ready to go. Like that was like in November or October where Vitalik did that, and that was just like the signal. Like, okay, I went from like within a year and a half, I went from like I don't know about this thing to like my whole life is about it. I quit my job. I just started working on it. So that's kind of like how I got from I don't know what it is to like my whole identity, my whole like career is now Ethereum.
That's a whirlwind,
Yeah,
Preston.
yeah,
What year was it like you said January, you quit your job, it was your final day, and then you went full
yeah.
time. What year was that?
That was in 2019. So it was just in about 12 months, 12 months after meeting Raul in person, we were working full time uh, at Prysmatic Labs. So I was like an independent client development team working on Ethereum proof of stake. I think we pivoted from sharding to proof of stake, but yeah, it was quick. It was really quick. And it's kind of scary because it was like, well, we have a product, but it's free and it will always be free and we'll never make money from it. So kind of sketchy, but the grants were enough for us to do this without having like a significant change in our lifestyle. Like I didn't have to, live in my car or anything like that. But obviously it wasn't making as much as it was at Google. Uh, but it's more fulfilling in the sense that I had a bigger impact on what I was working on, and that was just really, really exciting.
Was Prism the first like formal team working on Ethereum's transition to proof of stake? When did the other consensus layer client teams come in? Um,
Yeah, I would say that it was the first announced team, first independent team to do that. I think right after us was Lighthouse by Sigma Prime. I believe they were also in the first grant rounds, which were in like March. Like all this happened within like 2 months. Um, yeah, we were the first, and we kind of had this ethos about like transparency and like we wanted to be the opposite of like sketchy anons. So we were like fully doxed, like here's us, like we're real people. We had a Discord server where you could get your questions answered all the time right away. And that like because people were giving us money, right? For the promise of doing something. So we really felt that we needed to give back as much as we could as frequently as we could. Like it took us like 2 years from when we started to actually launching the beacon chain, or maybe it was yeah, about 2 years. I don't recall, but in the meantime, while we were like building, we were giving a lot of updates and like answering community questions and getting people excited. We were like the first folks to like set up little dev nets or test nets. It's just Prysm talking to Prysm, and getting a lot of like people excited and getting people used to the idea of staking. And like I feel like that really contributed to a lot of our, I'd say, the success of the Prysm client, and at least in the fact that, like, at some point it was dangerously popular. Like, it was like more than 2/3 of users we were seeing that more than 2/3 of users were using Prysm, which it's kind of a weird feeling because you're like, it's not like it's competitive, but you're also like, you want your client to be the best,
Yeah.
and sometimes a signal of like popularity is kind of like could be a signal of the best. But we were like, okay, wait, this is not a good thing. We don't, it shouldn't be that popular. So we did have to go on like I don't know, like a year long campaign of telling people like, Prism is really great, but don't use it. Use something else. Use another one. All the clients are really great. They basically do have the same feature set, the same like people you could trust. So we had to like talk about client diversity and why it's important. And I'm kind of glad that it worked out the way it did because back then, like before the merge, it was I'd say like the stakes were a lot lower, like quite literally, they were a lot lower. So we could go through this exercise of like, look, a client is dangerously popular. This is why client diversity is important. Thankfully, like nothing really bad happened, but it kind of got the signal out there. It's like, we need to take it seriously. Got people talking about it. So that worked out pretty well.
There were a couple of major pivots in the technical development of the what ended up becoming the merge. You mentioned sharding was what you guys were working on, and then sharding was completely thrown out the window to this different kind of design as early as you guys were navigating the direct users that are using your software, but also navigating the changing roadmap. um what was that like? What was the early days of the Prysm team development like?
Well, the early days were really quite painful because nobody knew what we were supposed to be doing. As you can tell, like looking back in hindsight, it's quite obvious that working on sharding in 2018 was not the right way to go. Um, it was more like we need to finish proof of stake, which was already working when I started. Like when I started, I was wanting to do um, sharding. Like they already had like like some kind of dev net with proof of stake that was already running, and you needed like 1,000, like 10,000 ETH. That's something crazy to run a validator. Um, so we pivoted because we said, okay, we need to do this proof of stake first. Like that was always the plan. We need to get to proof of stake, proof of stake. And then as we're building out proof of stake, L2s are already starting. I think like I know some of Arbitrum's history, and they started right around the same time that we did with Prysm. So they're already building these L2s. And as for like thinking about sharding, the general idea was that, there were a lot of different ideas, but one idea that we had was there was like a coordinator shard that's in the middle, and all it really does is like coordinate the other shards. And that's kind of like what the L1 is today. And then you have all these L2s that are building on it. And that started to come about organically, it would say, oh, that kind of looks a lot like this like hub and spoke model where you'd have, I don't know, 64 shards and they're all kind of like talking to the coordinator shard and like sending messages between each other through that mechanism. And once we saw like, oh, other people are building it through the L2 ecosystem, why don't we just accept that because they're already doing it and just say, well, let's just do that. And if you say we'll do the rollup centric roadmap in lieu of sharding, well, you kind of get the same end result of like all L2s and L1 combined have this accelerated transactions per second or block space capacity or throughput or whatever like fancy terms you want to use. They're scaling through L2s, which is very similar to sharding. So it simplified the roadmap a lot and still like achieved that like sharding goal for us. So what the early days were like for us were a lot of pivoting out. I think that in the first year, we just like deleted the whole repo like three times, just like started over. Because because we would like hear an idea from Justin Drake, he'd be like, cool idea, let's build it, let's go do it. Like he's, like maybe he just thought of it like that week, or the team, whoever thought of it that week. We just like go build it. And then like a couple weeks, or like a week goes by, and like, no, that wasn't a good idea. So let's pivot to the next one. And like I think that's just the nature of research, right? You have to try out a bunch of stuff. And we were just really excited to build. So we were kind of like building way too early, but we learned a lot along the way, because I think that was a good way for us to get knowledge, was just like to get hands-on experience with it, even especially like ideas that didn't work out, because then we still would always learn something through exploring those ideas. Like there was one idea originally where all of the like proof of stake state would be inside of a smart contract on the L1, and like every validator's like attestations for transactions. And then we're thinking like, wait a minute, isn't that gonna like blow up all the gas usage, and like all the transactions are just going to be validators like submitting votes or whatever. So we then pivoted to the model where like maybe the validators should have their own like separate thing. They go agree over here, and they don't compete with regular users for block space. So there's a lot of pivoting like that, where like we just like had a bunch of different ideas, and that, ended up us like just substantially rewriting the code base. Like first we started with the original idea of like, oh, we'll just fork Geth and then add a sharding directory and just start, I don't know, it's like really naive, just start sharding Geth. And then it was like, okay, that's not going to work. So let's go to the validator manager contract ideas. We started like building that, and then that didn't last very long. And then finally, like the idea of the beacon chain came around, where we knew it would be separate from what seemed like it would be separate from the execution layer. And that was like the last like big rewrite we had to do, or completely start over.
Yeah.
So that was like the first year. And then like, if I recall like correctly, 2019 was a lot of like, okay, we have the right idea, and it's just like ironing out the bugs and like building everything. And then I think we launched the beacon chain the next year. Was it in 2020 or?
Yeah, December 2020.
Yeah. So the first year was extremely turbulent. Then the second year was more like, it kind of made sense. And then, yeah, we kind of launched the thing. So that was awesome.
In terms of the workload on your team, I would imagine that it sounds like, like you said, it was very turbulent in the first year, but as the specs start getting more hardened, as you guys, get ready for the launch, and even shortly after the launch, the work that you guys have to do, I would imagine, is going up. From the four original kind of developers, can you talk about how the team started to grow, and the capacity of your team to take on like more upgrades, more testing, more user, I don't know, like user customer service, and all these arms?
Yeah. So it was a lot to manage for four people. So, right away we had a couple other people that were sort of like helping out, working part-time, and they didn't stick around very long. But once we got, substantial funding, I'd say like by the beginning of 2019, the four of us were on it full time. And then I think we hired a couple people right after that. And at some point we got up to like 8 or 10 people. I think 10 people was like, it's always been kind of like our plateau of like how many core devs can fit in the kitchen before it starts to like get too chaotic. So we would hire more people. Then we also had like a lot of like community support. Gitcoin was really fun too. We put like bounties on issues, and that was like a great way to get people involved. It's also a really cool like hiring tool, because like we would put out these like good first issues, and people would make a contribution like, oh, I'm running the thing and I found a bug and like I want to fix it. And that was really exciting. In fact, like one of our most prominent hires, POTUS, he he was like a math guy, and then he was like making contributions to Prism, and I would go on his like PRs and leave like a shitload of comments and be like, dude, you gotta fix this, all this like everywhere. And I thought like, sometimes I do this and I'm not, like I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but I'm always like kind of worried that like gonna like they're like really happy with their PR and then I like blow it up with comments. But he loved it. He's like, no one no one looks at my math work like this. Like I love it. So he was like kind of addicted to Ethereum already, but then like the way our team worked is we had like really heavy emphasis on code review and like everyone's like checking each other's work and making sure it works. And yeah, and so it's like a really cool recruiting tool. It's just like, you want to come work on Prism, like it's just there. You can just do it. You can just do things. It's kind of like the motto for working at Ethereum. Um, and yeah, so we would hire more, and like the EF was keeping us fed, so we had enough runway. We would always keep like a year's worth of runway and make sure that we could like grow the team to an adequate size and keep that runway. So if the EF was like, okay, we're done like giving out grants, or just like for whatever reason they just stopped, we'd have plenty of time to figure out what to do next. Like within 12 months, we could have found like a monetization avenue of some kind, like secondary service we could have offered. Like we didn't want to do it because it distracted from a core mission of like scaling Ethereum, but we would have figured it out if we had to, if it meant like stopping entirely or like spending part of our energy on making money. So glad we didn't have to do that. um yeah, and like as far as like how has our workload changed over the years, well, it's gotten harder because like the problems are more, I don't know, they're more complex. Like Electro was like the biggest fork of all time, right? Vector was huge. Um, so we have to do these like really big forks, and we have all this like it's like legacy software now. So like we have to maintain the code that we wrote 5 years ago, even though it's like not really getting used very much anymore. There's some code paths you could delete, but like we're never gonna like propose a phase zero block again. But you still need to be able to process one. It's just kind of interesting. Very interesting from traditional software engineering, where like you do an upgrade and you're like, cool, we're never going to use that again, so just delete it. But actually, you need to be able to like re-verify all the blocks forever. Um, so we have to like make sure the stuff we already wrote doesn't degrade and fall apart, and also like try to solve these more and more complex problems, most of which have never been solved before. So you can't just like go on Stack Overflow and like Google your answer. It's like challenging and therefore exciting, but also like it takes a lot of effort. And when you combine that with some of the pressures that core devs feel, right? There's like social pressure to ship now. Like what's taking you so long? Why can't the devs do something? And there's also like the pressure to not fuck up, because like Ethereum's never gone down, and it's because we haven't fucked that up. And you're just like every night you're like, fuck, what if I'm the what if I'm the guy that like breaks the chain? Like um there's like been a couple incidents where clients like just completely freeze. They just like break up. I think one like happened yesterday. So you're just like always kind of worried that people are going to be mad at you. Like if you do your job correctly, like everyone's fine, but if you don't do it correctly, then people are going to be upset with you. And it's just like all these pressures on top of like all the work. Sometimes like, some people have been facing burnout, it's tough. But like our team, like we have, we're all pretty good friends. So we have like a lot of support for each other, and, we do pretty well. So I think we're like in a pretty good spot. There's like a lot of pressure to go fast, but we can give, push back and give reasonable answers. Like we're going as fast as we can. And, like I said earlier, with our team size, like we like plateau around 10. It's some of the problems when we work on a Prism, it's not something you can just add more, people to fix it or add more money to fix it. It's just the way it is. Like you can only do so much, at once without like, putting security at risk or like liveness at risk. in terms of like making sure the client maintains a high standard. If you want to go really fast, like you can go really fast, but you know, you want to do it without cutting corners too.
Yeah. I mean, Preston, I feel like what you've shared, you've had to grow so much as a developer, but also in terms of like creating a company, like making sure the company is sustainable, being a business person, and then having this like platform, being a public figure for the entire Ethereum ecosystem where people are depending on you to like deliver. Who would you say are the key people that you've leaned on through your journey to like help you come into this role as a developer, a founder, like a key figurehead in the Ethereum ecosystem? Like, are there any mentors or like key people in this journey that you've really looked up to or drawn strength from?
I get a lot of support from my wife. Uh, I'll throw that out there. Shout out to my wife, Savannah. She's amazing. She hears like all my like complaints and all my shit. I'm like, yeah, I'm worried that we're gonna break the, the Ethereum blockchain. Oh yeah, that sounds pretty bad. She's always there for me. Um, but you know, professionally, it's like I was really really lucky to find the people that I did at the time I did. So finding Raul, Jordan, Terrence, and Ashant, like those guys, like the three of us came in as these like super green dudes, like never worked on crypto, like we're in this for the purest intentions. And I had like kind of like differing backgrounds, and together we were just able to like grow together and really work on a lot of these problems. Running a business sucks when you want to just like write code. Um, So, you know, like maybe we can talk about the acquisition. Like joining Offchain Labs has been that's been really, really amazing because what it enabled us to do was go back to just writing the code and doing the work and not having to like do accounting. Like I'm not an accountant. I like do like filing like taxes for the company, stuff like it's just like stuff like that that was really, really not fun. And and Offchain Labs provided like a lot of support. And I also like really, really smart people there. They're the folks that built Arbitrum, um, and Arbitrum and Off-Chain Labs especially recognize that their product, their thing they're building, really depends on the success of the L1. So they, you know, by having us join their team, they made this big investment into the L1. um, they provided us with like a lot of resources. So, you know, when I talk about burnout earlier, a lot of that kind of went away, like almost right away. Like, oh, we have an HR person. Oh, we have a finance team. Like we have, I don't have to think about funding anymore. Runway is infinite now, as far as I know. I mean, it's not really, but you know, they're a well-funded company. Um, and that there are other really smart people in the company that we can talk to, you know, people that wrote the Arbitrum stack and like work on this kind of stuff. So if we ever, you know, got stuck or just like people wanted to, you know, work together, it's been really, really nice. It's just nice. It's just nice when you like you are surrounded by people that are smarter than you because you have more to learn. So you always learn something from anybody, but like you know, there's a saying where you don't want to be the dumbest person in the room, but you especially don't want to be the smartest person in the room. I'd rather be the dumbest person in the room.
Okay, you got to tell me a little bit more about how this acquisition came about. How did you guys get in touch with the team? Was it the team reaching out to you? When did the runway start to become an issue for Prism? Let's start there.
Yeah, so there's no like need for us to get acquired. We actually were like probably in the best position in terms of runway. Like we had lots of runway, like the grants were bigger than ever. So, but what we wanted like wasn't just about like alleviating some of the monetary concerns. It was like all the procedural stuff, like all the processes we had to deal with, like running a company, like um, you know, hiring and all these kind of stuff. It just like it started taking up more and more our time. I think I would estimate for Raul and I was in coaching on like half of our time working was spinning us stuff that wasn't furthering the mission. I think we even hired like a executive assistant to help like deal with a lot of stuff. But there's a lot of synergy with the rollup centric roadmap of we really we were fans of Arbitrum, like really big fans of Arbitrum. I've been just like using it ever since it launched. And we just like sort of reached out to them and like, hey, we just like to talk and see like if there's like a way we can work together. I think I think we kind of we probably made the first like intro. Um and then after like a couple weeks we're like, yeah, no, never mind. We don't want to do it anymore. And they're like, and it wasn't like a game we were playing. We're just like, we were really like, I don't know. We were also like, didn't want to get distracted by another thing to deal with. We were getting really busy. And then like, wait, no, we really want to talk. So we talked to them. We went to New York and like met them in person and, Steven and like Ed Felton and Harriet, the founders of Offchain Labs and Arbitrum. It's just like really, really great people to work with. So we're really like kind of blown away with that. Um, and just like, hearing that their objective is the same as our objective and they can solve a lot of problems that we have. And then we could reduce a lot of risk that they're looking at, like in terms of L1. If they're funding an L1 team, like building on the consensus layer, then they have a lot of like firsthand knowledge of like what's going on, how can we make it better? And it really has been really nice. Like I was a little worried that, and some people were worried. I guess I wasn't so much, but having met them, but some people were like, "Oh, can you just buy core devs and then make them do whatever you want?" No, like nobody's told us what to do. It's just like this is like here's a space for you to work, and like you don't have to worry about running a company or funding anything. You just go do things, and then that's really been the reality of like we can go build what we need to, and we get a lot of support from the founders there. We kind of tell them what we need to do, and they're just like, great, that's awesome. So it really has been really nice.
Hmm. How long did those negotiations take? And um, would you say that looking back, there's anything that you wish you had done differently?
It took a really long time. I think it took like 6 months or something, maybe longer. It was like, yeah, it was a really long process. Because we wanted to like everybody wanted to make sure it's a good fit, like on both sides. Like they're like, everyone's kind of like, I don't really know you that well, but let's get to know each other. So we kind of had to do this like, it's like we were dating, like getting a little bit of time, but not trying not to like go too fast or anything like that. And then when we were like, okay, let's do the thing. And then you got to get then there's like, I don't know, 10 lawyers that are like arguing with each other over everything. So all that took a long time. Um, what was the second part of your question?
What would you say, looking back, if there was anything you would have done differently and why?
Uh, Anything I would have done differently? I'm probably not. I got really happy with um, what we've achieved so far and where we've ended up and what we're still achieving with Offchain Labs. It's been really, really nice because, like, I don't know, I can't echo it enough, but it's been really nice because we're also, like, some of us are contributing to some of the things happening in L2 space. So that's been kind of cool. Like, people on our team are really driven by these really hard problems, and the L2s, like, have their own kind of like unique and hard problems. So I guess just like in this entire path, what would I do differently? I would I would hire the best CPA I could right away, and it's not think that I can do it myself. When we are going through all the like due diligence stuff, they're like, "Yeah, dude, I don't think you were supposed to do that." And I'm like, "Well, I yeah, I don't know what I'm doing." So, there's a lot of stuff like that, but just like I took this mentality. It can just do things a little too far. Of like, I can do the accounting, I can do all the tax stuff, and we end up making mistakes, having to redo stuff, and then I was just like costing more than if I just went straight to the like best person to do it. So that would be my if I could do anything over, it's just like hire people to do these problems that I should not really be doing.
I want more learnings from you because you've gone through so many different phases of yeah, your contributions to Ethereum, but also the evolution of Prism, the company. Was there any point where you were like, I don't want to work on Ethereum anymore? Like, this sucks. Like, this doesn't work. Because especially in the first year when you said there was a lot of pivoting, like, were you ever regretting the decision of like, I can't believe I'm in Ethereum?
There's definitely been painful moments. People were upset. Not really at us, but just like, what's taking so long? That's been kind of painful. It was a little bit painful with the client diversity stuff of like, hearing people go on a campaign to get them to stop using our product. Like sometimes that sucked. We knew it was for the good of the ecosystem, but it just kind of sucked. I think the really, really terrible bear market in 2019, that really fucking sucked. I like sold all my Google stock. I put it in ETH, and it was like I sold my whole bag at like $90, and I bought it back at $100. And just like doing all the dumb stuff everybody else was doing. We were all feeling bad, but I never really thought like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. It's kind of a really strange thing. I can't really compare it to anything else that I found in life. It's just like, um, working at Ethereum, it's just been really exciting. It's taken me to places I've never thought I would go. It's like challenged me to do things I never wanted to do. Like I never wanted to do public speaking. Like I never wanted to like get on interviews or doing this kind of stuff. Like I was very like introverted, very shy. Like I just wanted to like be in my room and hack on the computer all night and stay up, just like goofing off. But when it when I saw that there's like this potential for impact and there's like an exciting technology and people care about it, uh, it's always been the positive voices out there that keep me going, right? Like we get a lot of shit sometimes, like you know the core dev community, right? Not necessarily me, but um, just like people are not always happy all the time. But then there are those like people that are like really reassuring that the roadmap is like good and like things are going well and like we can pivot and change and yeah, it's going to be great. So it's like as long as people care about Ethereum, I'm going to keep caring about it, and I really like it a lot. So yeah, I wouldn't. I don't know. If your question was like, what would I do after Ethereum? I don't know. I'd probably just like keep keep working on it forever. I don't know. I just really like working here.
That was going to be one of my questions, if not
Yes.
Ethereum, what? But you've already answered it. But fine. Counter question. Not if it wasn't Ethereum, but let's just say it was switched. You had found out about Ethereum before you found out about Bitcoin. And when you found out about Bitcoin, you that's when you were a Google developer and that's when you had programming skills. Do you think you would have just like worked on Bitcoin? Like, I'm just curious because there are so many limitations of both technologies and there's so many things still experimental about both. I'm curious, like, was it the timing that really just kind of like set this trajectory for you? Or do you think there was something else that really stood out to you about Ethereum?
Well, when I think about Bitcoin, I think about a lot of people who got their arms crossed and they say that white paper is the way it is. There's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin forever, and you're not going to change it. And that kind of like standoffishness. They have a lot of issues like trying to change anything, and then here's Ethereum that's like kind of wacky, kind of silly, like not taking themselves too seriously, but at the same time taking it very seriously. Where it's like a place where you could experiment and do things. So I think if the order was reversed and like I dismissed Ethereum too early, but wanted to work on something, and I thought about Bitcoin, I feel like I would be quite frustrated trying to do stuff and like just hitting a lot of roadblocks and just being like, I don't know, I would find that quite difficult. Where like in Ethereum, like things are changing all the time, and people are like, let's change it more often. Let's do 6 months. Let's fork every 6 months. Like just trying to go fast. Like, um, yeah, I don't know. It's just like, oh, it feels like a lot more exciting. Like Bitcoin is this cool, like, you know, trendsetter, right? Like it was the first crypto blockchain that's like shows like, look, this can work. And then Ethereum comes in like you can do more than just, you know, be a store of value. Um, and that's really exciting that you can like pivot and change and like keep growing, you know?
Yeah. What would you say are some of the core values of Ethereum development and development culture that needs to be preserved for Ethereum to succeed and realize its vision of being a global computer?
Yeah. Well, we have to balance this problem of being proactive about problems that are, not real yet, but forthcoming. We know they're coming. And also making sure that we're keeping the quality of everything pretty high without like introducing too much complexity. I do often worry that Ethereum will get to this like really complex point where like it's just like too hard to get anything done because it's just like anything you do is going to break stuff you don't know about. Um, so I do hope that there's like a place we get to where like we're just kind of like moving a little bit slower because we've kind of gotten the major stuff out, and then it's just like, okay, well, following like the advancements in hardware or cryptography or whatever it might be, like changing a few things here and there, but like um I think that like the introduction of a lot of zero knowledge stuff will mean that we can do more off chain, and then we'll just like keep growing the blob space. So like a lot of work is done off chain, and then it's just kind of like a checkpoint is stored on Ethereum. So there's like less that needs to be done inside the EVM. But really, it's again about balancing these like we have a lot of tech debt. Like Ethereum has tech debt. It's just 10 years old, right? There's software we're running from 10 years ago, and we also want to like make sure that we're not running out of gas before we get there. So we have to be proactive while also like not breaking the whole thing.
In addition to tech debt, how much does the lack of privacy that users have on Ethereum keep you up?
But yeah, that's a big one. I care a lot about the online financial privacy. I feel like I'm probably not the best person to like do something about it, but I support the cause. Um, I feel very strongly about it, right? So like I like the solutions that we have today. We have things like Tornado Cash, where you kind of anonymize your money. And I think that I'm really excited for the future where Ethereum just has like these in protocol mechanisms that anybody can remove your identity from your account when you need to, or when you want to rather. Um, it's like being a public figure and hearing a lot of like these concerning news stories about, the wrench attacks and stuff like that. It's like, you don't always want your whole identity and everything you do to be online. Um, but that's also like one of the benefits of a blockchain is like everything's supposed to be transparent online. So like I'm hoping that, sometime in the near future we can find this like uh compromise where like the things that need to be fully transparent all the time, like maybe like a decentralized exchange, like a game or something that's like, oh, you can see the engines, everything's like there. But when it comes to like individuals, they should be able to have their privacy, especially in like cold wallet storage, like fully disconnected. Like I know you can like make it's always pseudo anonymous because you don't know who this like hash string is, but once you know, then you can just start connecting all these dots and like doing on chain forensics to say like, oh, um, you accept donations at this address, and then you bought a coffee at my coffee shop. I saw you do it, and I have your transaction. I know who you are, and you have all these connect like I don't know. It could be this is some scary stuff out there that we deserve online privacy, and there's a real need for it. So yeah, I'm a big supporter of it.
Do you ever get concerned, Preston, that your work as a core developer may become illegal, like, one day in terms of the regulatory environment in which yeah, like, when you mentioned Tornado Cash, I immediately thought of the developers that are currently on trial. I think there's a big open question of, like, how much responsibility there is with, like, open source, development.
Yep. I have to go in a moment, but
Sorry, yes. No,
it's okay.
please.
Yeah, answer this question though. I worry. Okay, so the question is, do I worry about my work becoming illegal? And yeah, so I have been following the Tornado Cash suit against Roman Storm, um, because I feel like if they can arbitrarily say you as a software developer are responsible or can be held liable for the action that somebody else did with your software, that's a really dangerous precedent. Tornado Cash had a specific purpose about anonymizing money, right? So the government or whoever was really interested in targeting that because it makes their job harder, right? For like stopping bad actors. Um, but I wonder, it's like, okay, well, if they can, do that and they like following the case, they just like, this, like, it's a cherry picking exercise. Like, what things can I cherry pick? What facts can I cherry pick and string together to like manipulate the jury into believing this thing? Um, what can they do next? Like, can they start cherry picking stuff about my work? Like saying like, oh, well, if writing, Tornado Cash was illegal, then anyone who writes something that facilitates the use of Tornado Cash is then also illegal. It's like, well, like, where do you, like, how far down can they go? So that was like, that's like kind of a scary precedent. Like, you thought a couple times, like, what if they go to core devs because the core devs want to do like online privacy and those other things, and we're just writing like a credibly neutral platform, like it's for everybody or anybody, and I hope that people are using it for good, but I know that someone's going to go out there and try to ruin everything. So, I, just worry about that risk. Like, I actually don't think it's a likely thing. Like, I think that like a jury would be sensible in that case. Like, it would be hard to convict. Like, if somebody accused me of, um, writing a proof of stake protocol that then someone deployed an app on that then another bad actor used, like that would be kind of ridiculous. But it just gets you thinking about like, man, like writing software is not illegal. Like, don't like, I don't know. It's just really, that was a scary time. And I'm hopeful for Roman that he'll get, get a good outcome after this appeals and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the time, Preston, and for just sharing the story and the journey. Honestly, I still have many more questions, but one more last question before you go. For anybody that's listening and wants to contribute to Prism development and contribute to your team, can you talk a little bit about the best way to do that? You had mentioned the way that it worked in the beginning, but wondering kind of now, what's the flow, what's the process?
Yeah, if you want to contribute, there's a couple different ways. There's the Ethereum Protocol Fellowship, which is kind of interesting, where you can apply and work on projects. I think it might even be paid or compensated. I'm not sure, but that's a great way to get like to do like a substantial project. We'll put up an idea there. It's kind of, think of it kind of like a paid internship. It's pretty cool. If that's not interesting, you just want to start working on some Prism problems, well, check out the GitHub repository, github.com/offchain labs/Prysm. It's with a Y. You can find that online too if you can't type it in. Then if you're still like, looking at all of our issues and still like not sure what to work on, just reach out to me or anybody on the team. Our Discord is still open. So hop in there and say, hey, I want to work on something. We're generally pretty accepting as long as you're a human. We get some like AI PRs that are just like obviously AI, but if you're a human and you want to help, I want to help you. So talk to me and I'll hold your hand. I'll talk to you. Whatever you want to do, we'll help you get going.
Awesome. I'm going to link to all of those in the show notes as well for people that are listening, as well as link to Preston's social GitHub X things. Thank you again so much for the time, Preston.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of Ready for Merge. I'm your host, Christine D. Kim. And if you like today's episode, please be sure to interact with it, leave a comment, like it, subscribe to the show for alerts on when a new episode airs. Please tune in again next week for a new episode. It's going to be another Meet the Devs interview from my Substack vault, which means that previously was all kind of locked down just for premium subscribers. But I'm starting to open them up publicly on this Ready for Merge podcast feed. So this week's, the interview that you just heard was with Prysm founder, Preston Van Loon. And next week's Meet the Devs interview is going to be with a full-time core developer who is working on the Lighthouse consensus layer client. He goes by the pseudonym Eat Dreamer. So please be sure to tune in for that episode and stay ahead of the curve with me on Bitcoin and Ethereum protocol development. Bye, everyone.